Theo Bowie, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, so super excited because we go back quite a ways to some days where I think I met you on a beach. That
Yeah.
sounds a little weird, but
Actually, it was outside a coffee shop waiting to go to the beach. It was at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. It was something ridiculous.
that's right. And it wasn't even
Yeah.
open, and yet you and I are like two of the biggest
Right.
coffee fans ever.
Yeah.
So we'll probably circle back and touch on that. But I mean, like for those that don't know, I mean, you're a big influence, at least to me, with what you put out in the fitness space, the mobility space, nutrition space, just super consistent with influencing so many people. And so I think your story has a lot to do with resonating with that, going from, former athlete and just being so focused on athletics and I mean, I've seen some clips if you can throw down and dunk some amazing stuff, and then getting jacked and then getting hurt. And it's this saga that I think so many people can relate to.
Yeah.
So I honestly want you to share just a little bit about how you ended up in this position of, doing what you're doing in the fitness space.
Yeah, so I mean, it's honestly it's kind of a fluke, and I try to look back and kind of reflect on like why I'm here in the first place. Because just like anybody else, sometimes you get into this place of maybe you get complacent or you're trying to figure out your next move and this and that. And I always try to look back on, man, like, how did I get here in the first place? I've been doing this for nearly 7 years. That's not a whole lot of time in the grand scheme of things. And, I really kind of see it as like a blip, but at the same time, I've spent, so much time and energy and money into, always being better as a coach, over these years and since I've started. So really kind of how I jumped into it was I had stopped playing basketball and I was really trying to find out what my next move was. So, I went to a local community college. I did that for three quarters. And I actually got kicked out on academic suspension because I was just going for general shit. School is not my thing. Anybody who knows me know that's always kind of been the case. I've never been great at school. So really I was just going for, my mom worked for Alaska Airlines. She just retired, I think after like 35 years, at the beginning of 2019. So at the beginning of this year. So really I was just going to classes just so I could get travel benefits. And I had friends who were going to school in like San Diego. And, so I would just go in and I would hop on a plane, go over there or go to the east side of Washington State and go party with friends over there. And instead of driving all this time, I'm spending like fucking like $50-$60 on a plane ticket.
Can't be mad at that.
It can't be mad at that. So I was like, yeah, I'll just keep taking these classes. I'm not really going. I'm not really doing anything, but I get to travel weekends and shit and go party. So, so really quick, just big shout out to all my friends who are in, $50,000-$60,000 of debt and let me come party with them for the weekend. And I really appreciate it. But no,
they got school, but you got education.
Right,
like
exactly.
let's clarify.
I got real education experience. A lot of it I don't remember. But no, when I got kicked out, I started working multiple jobs. This is kind of about 2009. So really the economy is trying to kind of kick back up. This is post, recession. And nobody was hiring. So I'm doing these dead end jobs. I'm doing odd jobs. I'm selling weed. I'm trying to do anything I can to make money at this point. And I'm also trying to have fun. I'm a young 20-something-year-old kid who is, essentially I'm trying to find my way. I've always had these aspirations of being a business owner, being an entrepreneur. And at that point, personal training had never even crossed my mind. And up until then, and so I go back to that community college that I got kicked out of because my 1-year suspension was coming up. And I was like, you know what? Like, if I'm going to do something, like if I'm going to go back to school, it's going to be for something that I'm going to use, I'm going to apply. Right. And, you know, a lot of my friends who I was going to kick it with, who are now in tens of thousands of dollars in debt, they don't use their education at all.
Yeah.
You know, sure, the principles, I get it. You know, deadlines and doing the studies and all that stuff, you know, that's applicable everywhere. But as far as the knowledge that they received, right, like it's very hard to find jobs in certain spaces.
Sure.
So I told myself, like, man, if I'm going to do anything, it's got to be something that I enjoy, and it's got to be something that I'm going to really apply. So I went to the administration office, and I'm looking at this huge wall of all the brochures that they got for their programs. And I'm sitting there for, man, I don't know, maybe like 15, 20 minutes. And, you know, I'm looking at this business management brochure and kind of how they were selling it, how they were pitching it. It was just like, oh, like, you know, we don't really care what we write. Like, you know, let's just put this, and, you know, just the general basics. And I was like, man, like, I feel like I could learn that Googling shit.
Yeah.
And so I didn't go through with that, and I'm about to leave. And then I see, on the front of this brochure, it's like somebody lifting weights, right? Like bench pressing, like super cliche image on this personal training program thing. And I was like, well, I like to work out, right? Like, you know, if I could get paid to essentially do that or teach other people how to do that, you know, that would be, you know, we'll look into that. So I took it home, Googled national average of personal trainers at that time, which I believe was, I mean, it was a
That's
complete fucking
depressing.
joke, right? That's why you
That
laugh
is,
right off the bat.
yeah.
It was like the national average at that point was like $22,000 or something like that per year.
Yeah. Yeah. And the
And
average length of a career is still only 18 months.
yes, so I did not, but at the same time, I was where I felt like I was at, like, I felt like I was at rock bottom, you know. I
Right.
was playing basketball. I was doing everything I was doing, like from like 3 years old, playing basketball my entire life up until that point. Didn't miss a season. You know, trained for hours on end, even, you know, worked out and tried to be as specific as possible into improving my game, gaining weight so I could play at the college level. And then kind of losing that passion, you know, up until like that 2008, 2009 year. And then I decided that, okay, you know what? I'm not going to make it, right? Like, I'm not going to make it to the league. And that was a hard pill for me to swallow, right? Like, you
Oh,
know,
it's a
I
shift
kept
of,
on,
it's a loss of identity.
right. And I kept on going to all these workouts and playing with these teams. And each one, I'm not fired up about any of them. So, you know, and that's when I decided, like, you know what, like, it's time for me to move on. And then it got worse before it got a lot better, because like you said, it's a loss of identity. This is who I was for my entire life. My everything, you know, the only reason I even showed up to class in high school was so I could play basketball.
Yeah.
That's the only reason, you know. Otherwise, I would have not been there. And even then, you know, the public school system, I don't know how it is everywhere else, but where I went to school, it's a complete joke. Especially the school district. So they just kind of just push you through. I was almost like friends with some of my teachers, to where I could come in late or not show up, and, you know, they would, you know, they knew what I was doing and didn't give a fuck, you know. And then those other teachers, you know, it is what it is. You know, I didn't really have any good relationships, but I didn't have anybody except for one person who really gave a shit, you know, about, you know, where I took my life. And she actually was the only reason that I graduated high school. Found out that I graduated 2 days before graduation. I mean, so again, like, emphasizing that school was not my thing. And then, you know, going to the college level and realizing that you're not going to play basketball anymore. I was like, man, like, I'm really not going to go to school for this shit, you know? So found the personal training program. My second quarter, Luca Hocevar, my boss now, the owner of Vigor Ground Fitness and Performance, comes in and speaks to my business of personal training class. And right away, I felt like I could relate to him, right? Here's a guy who played basketball his whole life. He played at a professional level in Europe, for next to nothing. And I believe that, he's still to this day owed like $40,000-$50,000 from a Russian team that never paid him. You just hear all these horror stories of European basketball.
Yeah.
And Luca has one of those stories. So I felt like I could with them. There was a point in time where he kind of had like this loss of identity, and I was like, fuck, man, like that's exactly what I'm going through. And then now I'm standing here looking at this guy who owns a gym and he's doing pretty well in life, and I'm like, like I can get behind that. So the whole, like, he fired up the whole class. Everybody was asking questions, and Cody and I don't work with them anymore, but Cody, and I'm sure your listeners do, because I know he was on the podcast. We were the only ones who followed up, and he was a little bit further along in the program. He got in first. I went and met Luca at charity boot camp that he was running, and went and talked to him. He's like, look, man, like I'm not really looking to expand my team, for where we're at. This is, I kind of have my core team right now. So I was like, fuck it, man. I don't have anything else to do. So I just signed on as a client, started training with Cody. And I think it was about a year. Oh no, it was about 6 months. 6 months after that, Luca comes up to me during one of my training sessions. He's like, hey man, we got to sit down and talk about your internship. And then been there ever since. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I dove in. And like I said, man, I had no expectations of doing this. Like I didn't, as a kid, I did not grow up wanting to be a personal trainer, wanting to be a professional basketball player. And that's all I thought I was going to do for the rest of my life. And then, it took this sort of dive and this loss of identity for me to kind of realize, like, okay, you got to figure yourself out. What is it that you want to do? Let's give this a shot. Once I trained my first client, I was like, man, this is cool. I applied everything that I learned up until that point, and just the most basic fundamentals, and the look on somebody's face when they achieve a certain result was like, holy shit, man. Like up until that point, like I didn't have any experience helping people. I didn't know that feeling.
Yeah.
I did somewhat because I grew up as a point guard, and for those people who know basketball know that you're kind of helping, you really have a pivotal role in helping your team win. But I didn't see it like that, because it was like, we can go win, we can win a champ, whatever it is. I'm trying to help my team achieve that goal, but to be on a more individual, more specific level with each person that you come in contact with, man, like that was a different feeling that I had ever felt before, and including basketball.
Yeah, so that's so cool. It's interesting. I'm taking away a couple of things. I was just thinking about, like you're saying, point guards. I'm coaching the local high school. I'm running their strength and conditioning program right now as we're leading up to season, right? And they've never had an actual strength and conditioning coach. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking of the three main point guards that are in there. They're always the ones that I'm like, all right, let's clean stuff up. They're the most helpful,
right?
Probably like unconsciously, because that's their role. So that's right. Interesting.
So that I was the exact same way, like in after practice and after games, cleaning up shit out of the bleachers, and like I just did it because like that stuff always kind of got under my skin. Like, how can people leave a place like this, that. So I've always kind of taken that role. But that's interesting. I never really connected that between,
I didn't,
but
until
it
right
makes
now.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that ownership. But I think the second thing that's really cool is, I always tell people across the board, like from owning my last gym and what I'm building out now and everything like that, whenever they're finding a coach, and this is one of my qualifiers for anybody who comes on the podcast who is a coach themselves, is that you want to be able to ask, like as a client, like if you're looking to hire them, you want to ask, why did you become a personal trainer? Why did you become a coach? Because if there's not an identity shift, I swear to you, they're not someone that tends to stay in the industry for a long time and genuinely cares. And it's this fascinating thing. For me, it was like, I was like a very successful business owner and was doing really well. Shoulder got hurt. Then I couldn't even do anything, had to sell the business and was like, what do I do? Fell in love with the human body and was like, oh my gosh, like I lost all of that to become this, and I can help people like you with your story. Luca was
Right.
almost the exact same way, like Cody losing the weight and then becoming in. And it's like, the ones that just become a coach or a personal trainer because they just like working out or because they didn't know what else to do because they're an athlete, they don't seem to be the ones that are like truly bought into, like you said, almost clean under the bleachers. So I'm just finding
Yeah.
some interesting correlations between the most successful, as far as when I say success, I don't mean like most followers top dollar, but I mean like genuine people who have like really bought in followers and really bought in clients from that culture perspective, because I think it emulates through you.
Yeah, I agree. And unfortunately, you see the good side of the personal training industry, but you also see a very negative side too, because in the longer that you're in it, because I've met a lot of coaches who are really concerned about their title, and their job is really ego driven for whatever reason. This isn't like, if you're in this business to make a shit ton of money, which, right, everybody should want to make money. That's your responsibility as a business owner or being in the business. But if that's your sole focus, is making a shit ton of money, manipulating people that come in off the street who genuinely want help, and then all you do is kind of boost your own ego and force people to do it your way, fad diets, or whatever diet you might be doing, training the way that you like to train, and just projecting that on the people who come in. I feel like that's a huge disservice to the industry, and unfortunately you see that quite a bit.
Yeah. And it definitely puts a bad taste in people's mouth and then makes them fearful of trainers and different situations. And we see it a lot with, like the lose 20 pounds in 6 week type thing where you put money
Yeah,
down and, and it's a hard thing, right? Because it's potentially helping people. And I want to like give props to people that are doing what they can, but you're creating scarcity around money. You're putting a time frame on weight when there's so many other factors and it's not helpful.
for
And
sure.
you're forcing people to believe that it needs to be done in this time frame, and so things like that. So I think you're so spot on. So I'm curious where you think then is going to be the best direction for kind of the industry to go, and from your perspective, and what's working best to help people.
So I think that as far as the direction of the industry, I think that obviously we're more into technology now than we've ever been, and I've talked about this topic before, and the whole online or virtual space. I think that it's a great avenue, but it's simply that, and it still has to be mastered and established and built really well. I think that there's highly effective online coaching programs out there, Cody being one of them. I even refer people to him for nutrition still to this day. Big fan of what he does. But again, it still has to be, I think there's still some space to where, it needs to be really, really, has to be thought out. It has to be expanded on. Right now, I feel like we're in like this foundational phase of the online training space. But with that being said, there is never, ever, ever going to be any replacement for face-to-face, in-person coaching. And the reason I say that is because when you're like, we're having a face-to-face conversation right now, right, through this technology. But if I was coaching you, I can't see every little angle. I can't see, or I can't I can't maybe, touch you on your upper back and say, hey, Joseph, get your shoulders back in that squat, right? Think about squeezing your lats a little bit and giving you some of that external feedback, that's going to help you and take you a long way. So I think that there's more of a learning curve in the online space that cannot possibly be kept up with, as you compare in-person coaching to, the virtual space. But I think that the virtual space is only going to get better. And I'm really looking forward to it, because I think that it takes the people who really love this industry and hold it really near and dear to their heart. They take a lot of pride in their work. It allows them to have a broader reach. Luke and I do so much content for Vigor, and it's crazy that in the last year, the traction that has really built. So we have people messaging us every day from literally every fucking corner of the earth, in like some places where you might not even expect people to be reaching you from. Like fucking Pakistan, India, some African countries, all over Europe. Obviously Luke is pretty well known in Europe, South America. I mean, it's just insane. So to have that reach, and let's say you put out a product that's really, really quality, and you can get people to move in their house with just their body weight and maybe some bands. Maybe they can't afford a gym membership. Maybe they're in an area where they don't even have a gym, and you can communicate the knowledge and the skills and the techniques and the systems that you've spent so much time and effort into building, and putting it into a product that somebody can buy online and do it right in their living room. Is like, man, like, you tell me, dude, like, it wasn't even that long ago where if you were to bring up that idea, people would be like, man, shut the fuck up, dude. There's no way that's going to happen. But,
or they would just think like, oh, beach body.
Right.
Yeah. No, and I think that's huge. And I think about like what I did when I closed down Copper Moose Fitness, because we ended up moving to Arizona. I sat down or jumped on the phone with every single one of my clients to make sure that they transitioned well. And I only took 22 of them as online clients, because I knew that after working with them for most of them, honestly, close to 5 years, like having them as members that entire time, that I had delivered enough hands-on cues that I could trust that they were going to be safe enough to move well enough on their own.
Right.
And the majority, right, the other 150 plus, it was literally like, I feel like this coach is the better one for you to go with. This coach is the better one for you to go with, based on personality, based on where you're at. And it's like you had to have those years of in person to be able to get there, to even understand what needs to happen. And then it needs to be the right person. So I think it's spot on. So, for someone that is, coming from across the world or whatever, and wherever they're at, like, what do you feel this person like that needs to be able to find the right coach? I mean, I know you mentioned Cody in the nutrition space, and I flat out 100% agree. But there's so much stuff out there, and how does someone like kind of peel through the noise to know if someone is legit, like yourself, like Luca, like Cody, or it's just someone that's packaged and marketed and gimmicky something up really, really well?
So I think that when you have a conversation, first of all, it's going to start with being aware of who you are, what you need, why it is that you want to train, why you want to make that commitment. Because a lot of, the blame will be put on those trainers who are really gimmicky and stuff like that. But the truth, the fact of the matter is that if I were to go hire one of those guys, it's just as much my fault as it is their fault. There's got to be ownership on both sides. And the reason I say that is because, if you're in an area where, man, a good trainer is really, really scarce, right? Maybe you're in a rural area in fucking Pennsylvania or something like that, and you're 50 miles away from from Smitty. And that you don't really have anybody other than the local guy at the YMCA who's twisting his thumbs and making you do bench press 4 times a week. It starts, I think it starts with, again, being self-aware, why it is that you want to train in the first place. It can't just be, well, I want to lose 20 pounds. Dive deeper, right? And if you don't really know how to dive deeper, then maybe it starts with you. There's accountability coaches now more than ever, right? That's one of the most important aspects of, if not the most important, when it comes to training or anything that you want to get better at. So establish that, but then you go, once you have that, like, man, okay, this is why, these are my core values. This is why I want to lose that weight. This is why I want to improve my fitness, my performance, my overall health. Okay, I got it. Now you go and you interview coaches. I'm totally fine with being interviewed. I'm 100% okay, because I know that if we have a conversation, I'm going to find out one of 2 things. I'm going to find out either we are the right fit or we're not the right fit. It's really that simple. I'm not dying to train anybody. I want to train people. I love it. But I'm not going to beg you. And you shouldn't have to beg me either. It should be a mutual agreement and something that you both feel confident on. And I guarantee, and that's why, man, that conversation is so powerful. So it's asking questions of the coach, how they're going to get you from where you are to where you want to be. And then that coach is going to ask you questions back based on those things. So we can help each other close the gap and build that bridge. Right. And that, sometimes it can be a 20, 30-minute conversation. Sometimes it's an hour and a half conversation. It varies from person to person. I've definitely had, a conversation in that broad spectrum of, 20 minutes to an hour and a half. It just depends on the person. But if you just feel like you're being sold and you're like, as soon as you walk out of the door and you go, I have no idea why I just paid for training. Like, what is this guy? I still have no idea what this guy's going to do for me. Some people are just really good at getting you to say yes and buy shit and hand them the card.
It's true.
Right.
Yeah.
They're sharks. But if you leave and you go like, man, like, why did I do that? That's probably not the right coach for you,
Yeah.
So
but that's not to say, like, I mean, you do have to be willing to go in on it, right? And pay and put your money down in order to make a commitment and follow through. And if they're not able to do that, then I can't help them, type of deal. But I love this aspect of, it's a relationship. It's a conversation, and it needs to be questioning on both sides. And I think you're brilliant to say, like, raise some red flags with how you're feeling that's going. So what I was hearing is, like, 1, become highly self-aware of what it is that you truly want, and be willing to go as deep as you possibly can so you can gain that clarity. And I think clarity is a hard thing. Self-awareness and clarity are the 2 most needed, but they're also the hardest, which is what a good coach can help you do as well. But get that and then go interview them. So what do you think are some of the most critical questions that they could ask? Like, just 1 or 2 things that you've been asked when interviewed by people that you're like, this is a good question. This really helps. So for someone who's listening, ready to hire someone, what do you think they need to ask?
So, I mean, it could be as simple as saying, hey, this is what I want to accomplish. What are a few simple steps, or what are the initial steps that, we're going to take, in order for me to accomplish this goal, right? How are you going to help me accomplish this goal? If it's some, really surface level answer saying, hey, I want you in here 5 times a week, and I want you taking this supplement, and that's really all it is. You're gonna be able to tell the difference between somebody who really doesn't have a plan or a strategy, as compared to somebody who, they work that strategy every single every single day. So, I mean, it could be going through a thorough assessment, you know, all that stuff. So I really, and that would actually be kind of the next thing, is saying, you know, if you're talking to somebody and or you're looking into, and they never assess you before you start that first training session, that's another red flag, right? How are they possibly going to program for you if you don't know how, or if they don't know how you move? Say if you have any nagging injuries, right? Most people have some sort of neck, upper back, shoulder, hip, or lower back pain that they're constantly dealing with. How are you going to help me do? How are we going to either get rid of the pain or train around it? I would rather somebody say, hey, I'm not really familiar, I'm not exactly sure how we're going to work around you know, your knee being completely rebuilt, but you know, that's why it's so powerful for me to say, hey, you know, I have a physical therapist, I have a great physical therapist that I can connect you with. You know, we can constantly connect as far as being updated on every time you go there. Okay, this is what we need to work on, and having those other relationships in the industry. But if people were like, oh, well, you know, we're not going to squat because you have a knee problem, so we're just going to do upper body and core all day, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
It's the equivalent. That's the equivalent, in my opinion, of a trainer or training programs. I've seen it a lot where they're like, we just do intermittent fasting. Like, and that's,
right.
it's just a way, you know, it's a great tool for the right person in the right circumstance, but it's a way to kind of cop out from ever having to actually develop behaviors and habits and teach nutrition and provide that
Right.
education. So
Right.
it's kind of the same thing. So, you know, if they're just kind of, you know, sidestepping it and whatnot, then it's probably a red flag right there.
And the nutrition thing is huge too. You know, I'm like I said before, you know, I refer some people to Cody. You know, I got a guy who has Lyme disease, right? So a pretty, you know, that's an autoimmune disease that I don't really know too much about.
Sure.
I know that it affects the joints and stuff like that, but Cody is so much more well versed
Yeah.
in that stuff than I am. So it would make more sense for me to refer him to Cody as far as, you know, really getting specialized like that. As far as the average person, I'm a big fan of establishing, you know, your lifestyle. You know, what does good nutrition even mean for you? Do you know if you have any sensitivities? So it's asking questions along those lines. And if you already know, you know, as far as hiring somebody as a coach, right? Ask questions around that. Hey, I have Crohn's disease. As far as nutrition goes, you know, what would you recommend? Or, you know, what's going to be our step-by-step as far as nutrition? Well, here, let's do the keto diet, and you know, we'll go from there. Again, big red flags, right? If
Yeah.
somebody's just they're probably throwing that on everybody. So,
Right.
you have to take everything as a simple process, right? Like, man, like sometimes it takes me a while, and every person is different. You know, I always ask people to track what they eat for the first 7 days. I take them through a thorough assessment. We talk about sleep. We talk about stress levels. We're getting a bunch of biofeedback before this person is in street clothes, sitting 5 feet in front of me, you know, in a chair or a couch or whatever. And we're just going back and forth, having conversation, but trying to peel the layers of the onion back so we can get to, all right, this is where we need to start, right? There's got to be ultimate clarity. And then even, you know, sending an email to that individual saying, hey, this is what we talked about. You know, we had a long conversation. We covered a lot of topics. If you have any questions, right, shoot me an email and with all your questions, and you know, I'll try to answer them as thorough as possible. Maybe I even just shoot a video for them. So before we even train, it's just creating a massive amount of value. Because I'll be honest, man, to train at Vigor or to do online coaching with me is not cheap. But I've never had anybody have buyer's remorse. You know, there's obviously been people saying like, damn, you know, 500 a month for training, man. Like, you know, that's more than, you know, I drive a BMW. That's more than my BMW. You know, I sure hope you value your body more than you do your car, but,
Yeah, I
you
was
know,
gonna
because
say, well, your body is like your vehicle everywhere. So
exactly. But to each their own, you know, it's like I said, you know, you don't really, if somebody is leaving the gym and saying, I have no idea why I signed up for that,
yeah,
that's really bad. But, you know, if you have somebody who just signed a contract and they just signed up for $500 a month in training, and they text you later, they email you later saying thank you so much, or, you know, like, I'm super excited to get started, you know that you're on the right track as far as, you know, how you conducted yourself and you know, interviewed that person, right, and build on that, right? Never get complacent, constantly build on that. How can we make it better? How can we add just a little bit more value, right? Like, you know, maybe there's some things that I could give them for free. Maybe I can share a nutrition blog with them, right? If you don't know all the answers, own up to it, connect with people that you've networked with, and get some of those answers that you don't have. Not every coach has all the answers. That's just a fact.
yeah.
So having
That's a red
a
flag
net,
if they do
right, if they
within
have all the
itself, right?
answers, yeah, if they have all the answers, you know, you probably want to skip out on that person as well. But having ownership with that, and I even like to share that I have a network full of people in nutrition and rehab. I love talking to physical therapists,
Yeah,
uh, and getting a lot of the content I put out, I get from physical therapists and stuff like that. So,
yeah,
you know, and being fully transparent with where you're at, your knowledge level, but even more so how you're actually going to help them. That's the most important thing.
yeah. I love it, man. Yeah, and I think it's like all of these things could be taken from a sales perspective, right? For a coach that's listening and thinking like, oh, this is how I can increase my conversions and then help people and whatnot. But for the clients, it's like, man, like, yeah, their program does cost a lot, but it's because you're going to take all that information, and then when they are coming in and they're looking, you know, fatigued, you already had that conversation about sleep and stress. You already remember, so you know how to then program so that they can leave the gym feeling better again, and then it just builds month over month. So
Right.
definitely love it. So I think that's super helpful for people to kind of know some of the red flags when hiring someone, where to go, what to think, what programs and stuff. So super helpful, for sure. So one thing that I want to kind of talk about is because, you know, people can easily relate to your story on so many of the different levels, right? Like feeling kind of lost, you know, grew up as an athlete. I think a lot of people do. And then they lose their way with fitness, and then they try and like come back to it. They miss the camaraderie. They miss all of those things.
Yep.
But then, you know, when I met you, you were jacked and shredded, like straight up, right? You know, and yet you couldn't do a lot of simple moves because your back was so incredibly messed up. So from
Yep.
the outside, it's like, oh, young, super fit, jack shredded guy, like must be nice. Nope.
Right.
Like you're a mess, man. And then shifted pretty heavily from a lot of the big heavy lifts to a lot of the rehab stuff, and then found
Yep.
yourself sharing so much immobility. So just going through that, you know, obviously gives you the ability to relate to so many people across the board. But I'm curious on what your kind of thought process on fitness and health is, because I think it was so different even just 4.5-ish years ago when we first met.
Right. So, I mean, and again, I'll be completely open that, you know, when I first started coaching, and as I was kind of establishing myself in just my area, not even like, you know, necessarily in the industry, but you're right. I mean, I trained really hard. I wanted to take myself, like, this was literally my mindset, and still to a certain extent to this day, because I feel like it's a key component for me to really push myself and get better. And that's but it used to be every session was I want to take myself to a dark place and in my mind, and I want to overcome that. Right. Because, and I think that a lot of where that stems from is because, again, I had that loss of identity. And to me, that was a dark place. So how am I going to climb out of it? Right. And make sure that I never get back, to that position, or not being able to, even like buy food because, you don't have enough money. Right. Like, really actually being hungry, like that's something that you're never going to forget.
Yeah.
So then that even kind of carried over into my training. It's like, all right, I don't have any clients right now, and I don't really feel like, and when I don't feel like I'm going to train, then I would really tell myself, all right, you got to do something, kind of fucked up. Right. And sometimes I would not even, for a long time, I wouldn't even warm up. And I would just throw 45-pound plates on the barbell and just start bench pressing, right? Throw more weight on there, start bench pressing, more weight, start bench pressing. Next thing I know, I'm doing like 10 sets of like, 1 to 2 reps at like 300 something pounds. And then I go on to do, 150-pound chin-ups, and, like I'm just running
it's
myself
funny because I'm
through
literally
the ringer.
I'm literally picturing that meme that was like crazy hilarious that everyone was posting maybe like 5-6 years ago, where it's like your max is my warm up, and you were literally taking that to heart.
Yeah. So, and that in some ways that applied to how I train people. Obviously, I never trained people to the extent that I trained myself, but I also felt that I needed to give myself some credibility. I guess I would be the way that I put it is, like, here's what I'm doing. And now I can really say, I can really feel confident. And that's where I kind of got a little bit of my confidence from, was putting myself through the ringer and then taking my clients through a little bit more well thought out programs. But even then, like, even though a lot of my clients could perform like fucking lunatics, that wasn't necessarily the best thing,
Yeah.
So to give an example, let's say they run through a workout with me, I'd give everybody a dynamic warm up. That's something that I had them do, but I wasn't necessarily doing myself. And then we would go through a hard training session, and a lot of people I had doing really intense finishers, right? Well, I didn't have them doing anything to down-regulate themselves afterwards. So they're going to their car more jacked up than when they came. And a lot of people who walk into the door of a gym and who work 8, 10, 12-hour days, they're going to be more sympathetic dominant, right? They're going to be breathing from their chest and their neck muscles, and have no awareness of any diaphragmatic breathing or how to down-regulate or recovery or anything. I wasn't really concerned about that, right? And a lot
just poured fuel on the fire.
Just poured more fuel on the fire, right? And in many ways, like, people lost weight, people got great results, but then you start to see people's moods change, or get maybe they come up to you some random point in training and saying, man, like, I'm having a really fucked up day, this and that. But everything sort of changes. And I didn't really know that I could really have any control over that. Not saying that you ever have full control over somebody's life, but when you start putting in things like, all right, this is a more specific warm up based on what you need. We're going to focus on breathing first when you come in. So I set the tone right when someone comes in now, right? You have, you got crocodile breathing. So I want to see you do that before, you start with, and I even have a phased out warm up, 6 phases of a warm up protocol that I give everybody that's specific to them, based off of their assessment. And the first phase is breathing, because again, a lot of people are coming in after work and they're all jacked up on stress throughout the day. Some of them, want to slap the shit out of their kids. So I'm saving their kids' lives too. I hope they listen to this podcast later in life, but no. So taking them from that sympathetic state, down regulating them. And so now they're in this place where it's like, oh man, I feel a lot more relaxed. Or some people will even say like, man, I could just lay there all day. Man, sometimes I literally have people, because, you know, some do like HRV tracking and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Sometimes I will literally just have them breathe, do some mobility drills, and then go home.
Yeah.
And that it's kind of, you know, I know that if somebody is a client, and they're working with a personal trainer right now, they might be thinking like, dude, if you did that to me, I would fucking punch you. Right.
Yeah.
I'm
After
spending a
they
lot
just
of
drop.
money and I
Yeah.
want to train, but that is part of training, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, another skill as a coach that you have to have and develop all the time is auto regulation. So it's asking people. I have a guy who travels 36 weeks out of the year. He's an executive for Boeing. He travels all the fucking time. So I'm asking him constantly when he gets back, right? How was the flight? You know, how are you feeling? How did you sleep? What was your nutrition like when you were leaving? And he doesn't really think about it. I just do it because, you know, sometimes we're going to have to adjust. I do write him programs, but that doesn't mean that we're going to stick to that specific protocol every single week. We have to adjust based on that. But I mean, I probably went off on a rant there. I don't even remember where we were going with that, but
I mean, it was spot on. It was just like, you know, how have, from your life lessons with how your body has been through the ringer and different things, have you kind of adapted and changed your view on health and fitness? And even like, you know, you mentioned like avoiding from people slapping the shit out of their kids. Like it's so true. And, you know, you've become a dad, and how different that's probably, you know,
my training is way different now. It's way different now. You know, like I said, I put myself through the ringer a lot. I still do, but in different ways. Sometimes I only have 45 minutes to get in a training session.
Oh yeah, max. Sometimes for me, it's
know,
30 minutes these days. It's like
exactly.
microdosing.
And if I know that I have 20 or 30 minutes, you know, I'll do a quick 5-minute mobility flow, and then, or even sometimes it's just cars. I know that not everybody's going to know what that is, but sometimes I just roll through that, just to loosen up the joints. And then I get into an EMOM or an EDT or something like that, something that's quick but effective, and also is going to allow me to get a significant amount of volume, you know, in the training session. So even for me, you know, I have to auto regulate more than ever. Because sometimes I don't get a lot of sleep. You know all about that as well, right? If you have kids, it's you're constantly having to adjust. And even sometimes I feel really good, but my HRV says that maybe I should be chilling out that day. It's still really hard for me to this day to calm myself down and say, all right, you know what? Like it's okay to not train today. Just roll through your cars, roll through your mobility, do some breathing, do some soft tissue work, right? You're still getting better. And the next day, you know, maybe you're able to train and again, you put yourself to the ringer. So, but it's all about, you know, that balance and adjusting from day to day, and not being, it's important to have a schedule, but don't freak yourself out so much about the schedule that you go to a point of diminishing return. So I hope that makes sense for people, but I mean, there's just so many variables to take into play. And, you know, that's really how my training has changed from a couple years ago to today. But like you said, it took me getting hurt to really start focusing more on recovery, more on, you know, movement in general. And when I started identifying, going through mobility courses and seminars and workshops and stuff like that, I really started to zone in. It's like you're always assessing as a coach, or I always have. But now it's on such a deeper level because I know how each individual joint moves. I know where all the different compensations can come from. And then it's a process of elimination, and it's become so much more of an art form to me, to assessing somebody and then building them up. And I mean, it's really, it makes your job completely different every day, because you're always assessing people. I have people I've trained for, you know, since I even started, who I still run through, I might run them through an assessment and say, hey, you know, this is what's going on now, right? Especially if stuff pops up, right? But that's really how my coaching has evolved, is from my own sort of fuck ups, my own experiences. And then I relay that information to my clients. And I think that ultimately, it's not like I have a conversation about this with my clients on a daily basis, but I think that, you know, they appreciate it a lot more, saying, hey, like, man, like, this is what my coach did. And, you know, he's had this experience. He knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
There's that trust. There's that
He's
trust
human.
in a relationship a lot more. Yeah, exactly. I actually
He's dropped the ego have to show off, just stuck in the comparison realm of needing to smash weights to feel worthy. And now you're like, oh wait, it's not about me. It's about them.
And that's you know, that's funny too, is because, you know, I think as a athlete, you're going to have a certain level of ego. But for me, I'm highly competitive when, you know, let's say for basketball, for example, still to this day, if I go and play a pickup game, I'm incredibly competitive. I'm going to talk shit to you. I'll probably say some dark things. It's never personal. It's just like, it's almost just like fuel for me.
Well, there's the 95% Theo mood, where it's just like super chill, laid back, like highly focused, analyzing, right? You're pulled back, smiling, but you're analyzing every detail about everything, like assessing the room, assessing everything. Like I see it. Your eyes are like going in and figuring out, you know, like what needs needed. And
my
then
daughter's the same exact way.
And then there's the really.
Yeah.
She's
funny. The same. We've been able to see it, like, before she could even talk, you know, you can just see her. I mean, I'm sure a lot of kids are very observant, but she has taken it, you know, she's exactly how you just described me. She's the exact same way. And then when she finds something that she's really interested in, or once she's fully assessed a certain situation, she is neck deep and just complete tunnel vision in the task at hand. And it's like so fun to watch. But yeah, I mean, I'm very much the same way. And
then there's the like, I've only seen it in training, but it's almost like a pit bull. You circle in, and then it's like you lock and you do not release on whatever the task is, no matter what the circumstances. So I can't imagine what it's like in basketball.
So it's about the same. I don't really talk shit when I'm training or training with other people. But basketball still, or soccer or anything like that, I'll probably rip your head off at some point during the game. But I mean, like, I never try to show off, and that's a hard thing with social media, right? A lot of times I do train like with my shirt off, but I mean, that's all it is. It's not like, you know, I'm trying to show the world, you know, how hard I work, or you know, how hard I work for my body, or, you know, what my body fat percentage is, or that I have a six pack. Man, I don't honestly, I don't give a shit what really anybody thinks of how my body looks. A lot of it is just, I mean, it's just for me. I do me, and then I post on social media, and, you know, that's about it. But, you know, and even my body composition has changed since I've become a dad. You know, I'm not eating nearly as much but again, it goes back to the whole awareness thing, and going through a certain experience. You know, I went through a point where, you know, I started training, I was at 150 pounds, I'm 6'1", so really tall and skinny. And then my heaviest was 205, but I held 202 for what was it, probably about 18 months. But then I really started to get like gastrointestinal issues, to a point where I got tested to see if I had Crohn's or colitis.
Interesting.
You know, I had these sensitivities, like, you know, still to this day, man, if I drink milk, it's going to put me to my knees. And, you know, like, I can't walk. It's severe pain. Eggs and stuff like that. And so now I'm a lot more aware of, again, what I'm fueling my body with. You know, a lot of fermented foods, whole foods. I'm still can crush candy harder than anybody else on the planet, but you know, again, for the most part, man, I'm eating really healthy. And that's really kind of what, you know, we talked before we got on the podcast about, you know, me going hunting this upcoming week. That's really kind of where that kicked back up. You know, this is something that's kind of finally cultivated over the last, I don't know, 20 years. I remember when I was 10 years old, I really wanted to go hunting, but nobody in my family hunted at all. And I just thought that it would be a really cool experience. I grew up fishing. And then it was like, once I found out that, you know, all these documentaries that come out about, you know, what's in our food or how animals are being raised, and then going through shit yourself and having issues with your stomach and with your gut health, then, you know, you shift to like, man, like I never want to feel that way again. I want to feel my body with the best stuff. So that's when I was like, man, I got to go hunting. I got to pick that up. Like I thought about that when I was 10 years old, and I'm really, okay, now I really have to do it, right? Because that's the best possible meat that you could get on the face of the earth. And that was one major reason why, you know, I really dug deep in 2 years ago to the whole process. And so it's all kind of come to a head and next week I'll be hunting for a week in the middle of nowhere.
I love it. I love it. I think I'm taking away a few things from that. Is one, it's like, you know, training just has to adapt to the season of life that you're in, you know, and you've been at all spectrums of it. And now it's a season that works for you as a dad, and that can do cool things, that is living life and experiencing stuff like going hunting. And I think it's having the awareness to know that there's no end game, because even when you're talking, you're like, you know, if I only have 20 minutes, I'll still do a 5-minute dynamic warm up. Whereas like that would be the thing most people would want to kind of throw out and
skip. Yeah.
For that time's sake. And so I think the only thing with thinking about all of that I'm curious on is, you know, what do you do with the voices inside your head that say you're not training like you used to, or, you know, you're not going as hard or doing as much as the I shoulds or the comparison. Right. Because I think a lot of people definitely struggle with that. And, you know, for you and myself and a lot of people, we reach this place where it's like, regardless, I'm going to check the box and I'm going to do it, you know, do what I can with what I have, with where I'm at. But I think a lot of people that actually stop themselves, and I'm sure you've seen this from a client perspective, since that's mostly who's listening, right? Is they're like, well, if I don't have an hour and if I can't do everything, then I'm not going to do anything. And right. So how do you, you know, wrestle with those kind of voices and stories in your head?
Well, I think from a training perspective, I mean, I don't think that a lot of clients are necessarily going to relate because, you know, I have a knowledge level. I've done a lot of education, and, you know, I've put a ton of hours into programming and being able to adjust like that, right, to where that's not really the issue, but as so much as it is the thoughts like you talked about. So, you know, for me, I really try to remain as humble as I possibly can, because what drives thoughts like that is ego. You know, if, you know, oh, I'm not training like I used to, or man, or comparing yourself to somebody else, or comparing yourself to who you once were, which I feel like is like the most detrimental. Yeah. Even more so than comparing yourself to somebody else. But for me, I try to always just try to stumble and say, man, like, and appreciate things. And that stems back to a few years ago when, you know, when I first met you, you know, was going through that whole process. And that was really the tools that I had to learn is, okay, you know, especially if you start blaming other people for your problems, or, you know, it's really taking a step back and saying, man, okay, this is where I'm at. It is what it is. And as time goes on, you know, the more that you reflect on certain things, right, you develop these strategies in order to get yourself out of maybe that state of mind. Eliminating that, for me is really just taking a second to, you know, kind of create space for myself, accepting, you know, where it is that I'm at, And understanding that, like, man, like if when I go to a place of, because I still do it, of this is where I should be, that's the most ridiculous thing that you could possibly tell yourself. You're at where you're at because of, you know, everything that you've done leading up to that moment, right? So if I say that, man, I should have X amount of money in the bank, or I should be more fit or anything, it's like, no, you really shouldn't. You obviously, you haven't done the work in order to accomplish that. Maybe you have in the past, but you didn't do the work in order to maintain it and stay consistent. So
Perception versus reality.
Exactly. So when you point the finger at yourself, it becomes a lot easier. It's really hard at first, especially if you do have a big ego, but that's really how you combat that. For me personally, it's not something that I necessarily coach every single day. I don't sit down and have conversations with every one of my clients about that, because every day in the gym, somebody that I coach is going to be talking themselves through that. Most people probably, but it's how you communicate that message without, without having to sit somebody down, right? Maybe it takes that sometimes, but a lot of times how you communicate in coaching, the most powerful thing too, sometimes, is classes. I know a lot of my group classes, it's just something that you might say that might flip the switch, or you might see somebody who's acting a little bit out of the ordinary, and you say something that's more empowering and to build that person up, instead of, I know that a lot of guys in a lot of gyms will still kind of shit on their clients because they feel that they need to be the drill sergeant coach. Man, that's not what most people need, and a lot of people aren't going to respond very well to that.
Agreed.
And
100%.
if not, it's just going to make them spiral deeper into those negative thoughts. So again, like for me, man, it's if I have those, I should be here, or, my bank account should read this, or, just anything, I should be speaking at this event, I'm better than that motherfucker. That's you're never going to get anywhere thinking like that. And that's something that I have to tell myself, even still to this day. And I'm sure it's gonna happen for a long time, but like I said, having those systems in play, where it's like, all right, well, you want to get better, right? Like you were just complaining to yourself about, I should be here, I should be more fit, but you're not. So here's an opportunity. Look at it as an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to learn. That gives you credibility. And no matter what you do, whatever job you have, if you're a stay-at-home mom, whatever, a stay-at-home dad, it doesn't, that sort of empowerment, that sort of strategy is going to help you regardless, because it's taking something that might give you some adversity, and a lot of that shit is self-talk. It's not anything that the media's putting out. It's not anything else that anybody said to you. It's how you might receive that information, and then how your mind is just turning it in your head and then making it into a negative thing. So you really just have to kind of figure that out for yourself in some respects, and say, hey, this is where I'm at. This is an opportunity to get better. If you can make that little shift, I mean, it's a very simple thought.
This
right?
is the opportunity to get better.
Exactly.
Yeah. What was interesting, I just caught it right there. I've noticed that almost every person who has made a complete transformational shift, even if it's people who have lost 60, 50, whatever pounds, but, ones that had done it at least 3 years ago, because I won't interview someone who has lost weight unless they have kept it off for longer than that. So I know it's actually legit, right? It's not just a phase. They're a part of that 5% who actually lose the weight and keep it off. But almost all of them, they'll talk to themselves in third person. And you just did it like once while you were in there. You're like, when I'm going through these I shoulds and shit, I'm like, you need to. And you started talking to yourself in third person. And it's an interesting thing. It's like the separation of self, right? Here's my ego, right? And here's how I need to talk to myself so that I can bring that up and bring myself to a higher level. So it was interesting that you kind of did it full spectrum within there. So that's super cool. So, so before I ask my last question, where can they find Theo Humble Hustle Bowie? That's what I'm naming you. So, Humble and the Hustle, and I can see it on both ends. So Theo Humble Hustle Bowie is what I'm calling you. But where can they actually find you? Because you put out so much content, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just keep things simple, man. It's Theo Bowie. So YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, just type in Theo Bowie. On Facebook, it's actually Theo Bowie Fitness. I believe there's a hyphen in there. I never fucking look at that thing, but I just post and try to get off. But yeah, just my name, TheoBowie.
Sweet. We'll link all that up in the show notes. I'll put Vigor's page down too, since I know
absolutely
you shoot a lot of stuff with Luca, and then he throws it up on there, or you do, and that's always great stuff. So cool. Last question, my friend. Like, what do you think is the number one thing someone on the other side of this podcast who is sitting right where maybe even you used to be at one point in life, right? Like, needs to hear about what is the truth of transformation?
I mean, I don't think that it's something that even somebody who used to be or who is where I used to be, I think that it's something that you constantly have to tell yourself, kind of just like the topic that we were just on. But the truth of transformation is, I mean, there's a few things. One of them is having the accountability. I can't stand the term self-made. I really do not like that. So understanding that it's okay to ask for help, especially men. Obviously I say that because I can relate. Again, like we've talked about a lot over this podcast, is dropping the ego and being willing to ask for help. But we also touched on this earlier, was self-awareness. You have to be incredibly self-aware to even, you don't necessarily have to get to the deepest level of self-awareness in order to start the process, but you got to make sure that during that process that you're constantly assessing where you're at and being real and saying, what is it that I really want? It can't be a surface level reason, right? 100 pounds, to lose 100 pounds takes a lot of work, right? That's a big goal. But what's going to make that really achievable is, man, like, why do I want to lose that 100 pounds? So I think that there's a few different steps, but again, being massively self-aware and allowing yourself to be held accountable. I think that it is important to have and to obtain and maintain self-discipline. But I think that every martial artist or athlete or anybody really, like, if you've ever tried to learn something, right? I'll take basketball, for example. I didn't teach myself. I've had so many coaches over the years who taught me the skills, who taught me the game, who taught me the principles, taught me how to respect the game more than anything. And they held me accountable throughout those years. And if I lost my way somehow, or if I got too big headed, they were right there to kind of bring me back to reality, say, hey, this is where we're at. Right. And then we can build on that. It's okay to be confident, but you don't have to bring anybody down, in your path to achieving greatness. So, man, I actually got a funny story about that too. Is I scored so I'm in second grade, and I'll try to wrap this up as soon as possible. But it just popped in my head, and I felt like I got to tell it. But it touches on the accountability thing. So my dad was my coach, and I scored like 50 points in a basketball game. I'm in second grade, right? And I thought I was the shit. My team had 58 points. and we lost the game. So I had 50 of 58 points for my team, and we lost the game by like 4. And I was pumped up. And I go up to my dad. I'm like, Dad, I scored, you know, at the scores table. You know, all the kids used to run up there. How many points did I score? And I'm like, Dad, I scored 50. And he looks at me, he says, son, we lost the game, and nobody likes a ball hog. And I was like, damn. And before that, I was a Lakers fan, and I'm still to this day a diehard Lakers fan. But the reason why was because of Magic Johnson. And, you know, my dad used to then work with me on how to distribute the ball like a true point guard, and saying how you have control over the pace of the game. So that was one of the most important lessons that I ever learned in my life, not even just about basketball, but just about life in general, right? Like you might feel like you're the star of the show, but you have 4 other guys that you're sharing the court with, and that you're trying to accomplish a common goal. But you try to do everything yourself. So, I mean, even at an early age, you're constantly learning about self-awareness. And that's why sports and team things are so important for kids at a young age. And you know, it's kind of the catalyst for holding each other accountable, being a part of a team. And I feel that was a moment that really sort of transcended me, you know, even at an early age, you know, into a transformation into the individual who I became. You're constantly going to sort of have to battle with that, because later in life, I quit basketball, and I had to do that same thing, right? I had to transform myself again. And one of those things was becoming self-aware. And I had people in my corner who held me accountable, who didn't bullshit me. So those are 2 really, I mean, there's so many, again, like I said, there's so many variables to it, but those are the 2 main things that I felt were really powerful in my own personal transformation. And I'll keep doing, and take with me for the rest of my life, and teach that to my kids as well.
Love it, man. So good. Self-awareness, accountability. That makes sense why your guys' phrase is just always rise as one.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, man, greatly appreciate you coming on the show. Super insightful. And I know a lot of
thank
people
you for having me, dude.
Heck yeah, get a lot out of this. So awesome, brother.